In the name of Allah, most compassionate, ever merciful. Chair, proposition, opposition, dear ladies and gentlemen, I greet you with the Islamic greeting. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. May God's peace and blessings be with you all.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Same to you.
I'd like to first of all inform you that I'm a Dutch citizen. I was brought up in the Netherlands. In fact, I speak the Dutch language much better than I speak the language of my parents, which is Urdu. So the reason I'm mentioning this is that I am speaking not as a Pakistani. I may look as a Pakistani, but I'm speaking here as a Western citizen, as a Dutch citizen. The thing what I noticed is when I was informed and when I was invited to his motion, looking at this motion, is Islam is a threat to the West. I think first of all we need to define and we need to understand what do we mean with Islam and what do we mean with the West. Only then we are able to understand whether the Islam is a threat to the West or not. When we look at Islam, and by listening to the members of the proposition, it struck my mind that there are two different realities. First of all, there is the reality of Islam, the reality of Islam which is based upon its teachings as propagated by the Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad. And the teachings of Islam are all, they are based upon two main sources of Islamic law, the Quran and the Hadith. And on the other hand, you have something which is the perception of Islam, the perception people have in the West of Islam. And I must say, listening to the members of the proposition, it really, unfortunately, the case is that the perception people have in the West is a perception which is driven by the media. It is a perception that is driven by the media because the media highlights a very small amount or percentage of people that claim to represent Islam. In fact, they have nothing to do with Islam. When we look at the reality of Islam and then the perception of Islam on the other hand, the reality of Islam, we see the perception, people say Islam condones terrorism, Islam is for violence, extremism. That is absolutely wrong because the teaching of Islam is in the Quran. Man qatala nafsan bighayri nafsin faka'annama qatala an-nasi jami'a. A person who kills one human being, it is like he has killed all of mankind. A person who saves one person, it is like he has saved all of mankind. On the other hand, the perception is that Islam, that people must follow Islam. This is what I heard from the first speaker, from the proposition. The reality in the Quran is La ikraha fi din. There is no compulsion in religion. You may follow, you may accept, you may believe whatever you like to believe. There is a verse, I'll take it later, thank you. Lakum dinukum waliyadin. There is a whole surah in the Quran speaking about the relations with the non-Muslims, which is the chapter of the non-Muslims, Surah Al-Kafirun. The end of that, the end of the surah is Lakum dinukum waliyadin, which means you have your religion and we have our religion. This is what the reality of Islam is. The perception is women have no rights. The reality is totally different to that. Let me quote here one incident, one event. I'll take it later, thank you. One event in the time of the first Caliph of Islam, Umar Al-Khattab. Umar Al-Khattab wanted to set a limit of the dowry because women were maximizing the amounts of dowry for the marriage. So Umar, the Caliph of Islam, wanted to have a limit. So he called the legislation and he wanted to pass the bill through the legislation. And you know who stood up? A lady from the parliament stood up and said, Umar, how dare you do something that God in the Quran has never done, which means God has never set a limit of the dowry, a maximum limit. How dare you do so? I'll take it later. Thank you very much. So what we understand 1400 years ago, among the judiciary, among the legislation, there were members of parliaments who women, and the perception is women have no rights. The reality of Islam is when the Prophet Muhammad was asked, as narrated in a very authentic hadith, Oh Prophet Muhammad, what is a Muslim? How do you define a Muslim? You know what he said? Al-Muslimu man salim al-Muslimuna min lisanihi wa yadihi. The true Muslim is the one from whose hands and tongues others are safe. And ladies and gentlemen, if there is any individual on the media or speaking on behalf of Islam, but his behavior, his code of conduct, his attitude is contradicting the teachings of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, please be aware that person can be anything, but he can never be a Muslim. Because for a Muslim, you need to be a peaceful person. So we from this understand, and I would like to also mention lastly, when we look at the understanding of Islam throughout the Muslims, the mainstream Islam, the mainstream Muslims, and also the jurists that have of the past few centuries, the 13th, 14th centuries, of Islamic law. We find that every single scholar has always condemned terrorism, has always condemned extremism. In fact, the Muslim scholars living today, among them I'd like to quote one who is alive and is among the 50 most influential Muslims, Shaykh al-Islam Dr. Umar Al-Qadri, who has written a fatwa against terrorism, who has written a 600-page verdict, legal document against terrorism, all providing proofs from the Quran, from the Hadith, from the jurists, from the argument, from the law, from the teachings of Islam, that terrorism or extremism has nothing to do with Islam. And let me tell you that I'll take it later, what to talk about Islam. Extremism has no place in any religion. No religion teaches extremism. No religion teaches violence. And lastly, before I finish, it's very difficult for me to stay to the 7 minutes. I'm used to talking on TV for 1 hour and on the Friday lectures for 40 minutes. I'm sorry. Just lastly, I'd like to end here. You know, there is the perception of Islam. What is the real threat? The real threat to Islam is ignorance. Is not being able to differentiate between the reality of Islam and between the perception of Islam. And I think this is the biggest threat of the Western world. It is not Islam that is the threat. Thank you very much.
Muslim Americans, I might add, are not only protecting their fellow Americans abroad, they are also supporting non-Muslim Americans like myself at home. Let me give you another example. On our visit to Los Angeles, Professor Ahmed and I went to the home of a Pakistani American. The event, a film event, started, and I started speaking with the mayor of a local city. I suddenly became very ill. I was not breathing normally, and I was nauseous. My throat closed up, and the rest of my body started breaking out in hives. I was having a severe allergic reaction to peanuts. Luckily for me, there were numerous Muslim American doctors and physicians at the party. These Muslim men and women immediately rushed to my care. A handful of them sat by my bedside, while others called the medics to rush me to the hospital. Fortunately, I survived this scary incident. Nevertheless, I can't forget the care that I had and the security that I felt in the hands of Muslim American citizens. Like many other Americans, I did not have health care at the time. Nonetheless, the day after the event, the Pakistani Muslim American man who hosted the event offered to pay my $2,000 medical bill.
Very good.
Let me ask you another question. Are the Muslim Americans that cared for me during this life-threatening incident a threat to the West because they too follow Islam? One of my impressions of the overwhelming majority of Muslim Americans is that they are anything but threatening. Several other moments of my journey support my argument. We participated in a Sufi zikr in the heart of Manhattan. We visited Imam Kazmini at the Shia Mosque in Dearborn. We were stuffed with food by Senegalese Muslims in Memphis, Tennessee. We spent time with Somali Muslims in Grand Island, Nebraska, who were recently fired for practicing their religion. We listened to war stories of Bosnian Muslims, and we even conversed with converts from Dallas, Texas. Islam, you see, is not a monolith. A monolith, for those who are not familiar with the term, means solid, uniform, and fixed. By carelessly clumping all Muslims into one Islamic group, our proposition suggests that Rumi, the 13th century poet who spoke of peace and love and who wrote poems about Jesus, is a threat to the West because he follows Islam. Muslims follow many different streams, many different interpretations of Islam. They might be Sufis, Shias, Sunnis, and so on and so forth. Could some of these members of these groups be a threat to the West? Yes, they perhaps could. But dealing with these groups as separate entities is not the point of this debate. We are debating whether an entire religion can be a threat. If you look closely, the wording of our proposition forces us to deal with the term Islam in the singular sense as a monolith. Islam, as seen and treated in the language of this very proposition, cannot be a threat to the West, because Islam is not a monolithic entity. That does not exist, and it will never exist. Islam, therefore, cannot be a threat to the West, because there are, in reality, multiple Islams, in the plural sense. In conclusion, I would just like to add that I was very privileged to participate in Journey into America, and I will be once again very privileged on our forthcoming journey into Europe. Others may not be as fortunate, and this is why they might suffer from prejudice. But I will just like to leave you with the simple proposition that knowledge and education through real human experiences in homes, in places of worship, and schools, with your neighbors, eating food with them, speaking to them about their family, this is the only way we will overcome these blatant stereotypes and misperceptions. Thank you for listening.
And indeed to all of yourselves who came out in the lashings of rain on this dim Tuesday evening to come and have such a wonderful debate. And it's really great to see that even in horrendous weather we're all willing to come out and have open up a bit of discourse. But without any further ado, I would like to put the motion to the floor. So if you agree with the motion that this House believes that Islam is a threat to the West, please raise your hand. And if you disagree with the motion that this House believes Islam is a threat to the West, please raise your hand. It's safe to say that the motion has been defeated. Thank you all very much.